Okay. So first, thanks Heather for inviting me today and to give this talk. The brief I was told would be helpful would be about coping in the pandemic and what helps. So I try to put it together thinking about what you guys might be dealing with specifically, as well as just general coping strategies about what, people who maybe not have conditions have to deal with. Um, and just as an overview, basically what I'm going to do is talk about understanding, identifying types of responses people have to the pandemic, ways that people can psychologically prepare for it as well, and different ways of coping, and going through things like mindfulness, self-compassion, radical acceptance. I don't know if you've even heard of these things, but some of you probably have. Resilience, social connection, and professional support, and self-care. If we get enough time, this is actually quite a big topic. I thought it was going to be little, and then I got into it and I went, oh my God, how am I going to get this in 45 minutes? The responses in children and in couples, because that's another issue that comes up in pandemics. So just by happenstance, I happened to be doing one of these psychological courses that brought me into the emotional phases of disaster, which I thought was sort of interesting. And basically, the way they go is that you get this pre-disaster phase where everybody sort of is aware or thinks it's going to happen, but maybe not. The impact happens and everybody just goes into basically, let's just sort it out. Let's just do it. Let's just figure out how to survive this. And between then and the honeymoon phase, where we sort of got over the bump in a way, people do heroic things. And some of the heroic things people have done is self-isolate for long periods of time in this particular pandemic. Then there becomes a honeymoon where people think, oh, yes, we sort of did it. And there's a collective, yes, everybody's doing really well. And then there's a disillusionment phase that comes in, which is, well, we did it, the government's not supporting us, or it's still going on, but not quite finished. And over time, once disillusionment sort of settles, there's a reconstruction phase where life keeps going on and a new life might happen. And as I was thinking about how this may affect people who are living with genetic conditions, I sort of thought, well, this just isn't just a one-off for you guys. I think it comes in quite a multiple different, you have multiple graphs, not just this one-off graph. So I'm curious, I'm just going to go back to you guys and just have an overview of thinking, where do you think everybody is now, or everybody thinks they are now, in relation to the COVID pandemic? So I think if I can try that, going back to you. Does anybody want to give me any sort of heads up where you think you might be?
Honeymoon.
Honeymoon. Okay. Can I ask why?
Because we're coming sort of, things are looking better, and like we're sort of thinks like we're coming out of it, but you never know, sort of thing.
Okay, cool, thanks. And anybody else? Does everybody agree honeymoon, or someone's got some other? Yes, one down there.
I think I'm post-honeymoon. I'm exhausted.
Ah, really? Yeah.
Yeah, it's strange because I thought I was coping really well, and then just one news item just zapped me. And
yeah. So you've done it. Yeah.
Obviously, that was just a straw that broke the camel's back that I wasn't aware that was going on, But
yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense.
I think too, when we know that restrictions are loosening up, then we can sort of let go of being resilient a little bit, and that's when the tiredness comes in too.
Thanks.
Because the end is near.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to comment? No? Okay, I'll just go back. Sorry, I'm going to be a bit clunky, but okay. And okay. So they've done a few studies on how COVID's impacts on people, and basically, mental health wise, twice as many people are reporting things like nervousness and tension, and 1 in 3 are financially worse off. So it's quite a global thing for everybody. It's not just people who have got a disability issue anyway. It goes further than that. But the important thing to also know that if there is a genetic condition in the family, you're already starting behind the 8 ball. You've already got more stress than most people have to deal with. And I know that's probably stating the obvious, isn't it? Okay, so most people respond to this sort of threat with increased stress, which just basically is a body's reaction to change. There's fear and anxiety, which is common as well. The isolation is common, financial stresses are common, and getting worried about the future is also common, or being infected. And people still continue to feel anxious about the future. However, I just want to point out that with a disability or a genetic condition, isolation can be more difficult because some people rely more on external help and getting people to come into the home. So you're exposing yourself a lot more to potential infections. Some services respond slowly, lack of staff, people not wanting to go to work. So there's more stress on the person staying at home doing everything. And the carers have a lot of issues with not as much time out for themselves at all. Social supports generally drop down, and respite is less available. I've heard people saying to me, I'm too scared to go to Bear Cottage because I don't know exactly if it's safe. And so people are staying more at home and having less contact with people. And that's also causing a lot of stress. Financial strain's increased. And when you've got a genetic condition where you're not certain about what it really means for the whole person, how do you know if your child gets infected or if you get infected, how bad it's going to be? Mm-hmm. And I think, again, it's that uncertainty. It's not like your kids get this sort of get out of jail free card because they're young anymore, and you don't even know what that actually means, and it's quite stressful. Relationships can have stress, just your normal everyday relationships, and other kids that are in the family that are siblings of an infected child also find it harder. And parents often feel guilt that if they're caring for a child, that they're not doing enough now. There's the availability of some of the caring of the services are down, or they're not going to hospital as much, or they're not doing as much physio as they're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So that can create a lot of problems. Additional issues for the child. As I said, potentially they could be more susceptible to a worse COVID illness. The isolation, again, more difficult. And if they go out, it's potential that, they'll touch things, or they'll be, they're harder to control because they may have higher impulsivities. And so even going out with a child could be like much more stressful. Some of the items which you need get unavailable. And some children don't like a change in different in smells or sensory things. They get quite agitated by it. Any change can be unsettling. Normal routines have changed, and that can be incredibly unsettling, especially with a child who has a disability. And as I said before, being good hygiene outside the home, asking them to wash their hands, keep their hands clean, is almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I see some. I can't see any yeses, but I'm assuming there are a few. Okay, so it's important to recognize in yourself. The lady that just spoke said she didn't realize that she was at her breaking point, because stress is important, because it's a normal part of life. Stress is about doing something different, right? Or just experiencing a change. So stress is a normal part of life. But when we get up to too much stress, we get out to burnout, and then we feel totally flat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually important to recognize what the signs are of the too much stress. So it's the hyperarousal, always feeling like really wound up, really like, something's going to happen. Hypervigilance, like you're watching for everything. You're watching for every little touch. You're watching for every little, watching the news all the time. Some people get really busy. They run around doing 101 things. They can't stop because it's the sort of extra adrenaline floating around in their system. Some people get defensive or just quickly reactive to something, even ask, can you please, put the rubbish out? Well, you might get screamed at. That sort of reactivity. Some people become very judgmental about I shouldn't, would have, could have, or you shouldn't have, would have, could have, and that causes issues in relationships. And that's the sort of controlling behaviours that also come into it. So, sorry, was someone about to say something?
No, sorry.
Okay. To sort of break it down even further, you can sort of divide all these responses into physiological, cognitive, emotional, and behavioural responses. So I'm just putting a few up here on each one of these. The physiological responses to stress. One of the biggest ones is changes in sleep patterns. Don't know how many of you had changes in sleep patterns? Yay, nay? Can't see. Hopefully, maybe a few of you had. Sorry?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
More yes, assume yes is there. Okay. So more like stomach problems,
Yes.
stomach aches. Yeah, okay, another one there. Headaches, racing heart, just getting startled more quickly when something happens. Feeling a bit woozy at times, a bit dizziness, that sort of thing comes into it. Anyway, that's just a list of the physiological responses. And this is really so you guys can have a look at what might be just signals to yourself that, hey, I need to do something about this. Same things with cognitive responses. One of the things I've noticed is difficulty concentrating and remembering things. Like you may think you're going to have to organize this appointment, you totally forget about it. You can get like a problem becomes really big as opposed to just it's a problem, and you worry a lot. Sometimes it's actually really hard to make a decision. When you think you've got something coming up, you sort of feel a bit like, I just don't know what to do. So your reactions are a bit slower and you feel your decisions aren't as good. And it's hard to concentrate. It might be hard to sit down and read a book, for example, because you're just feeling a little overwhelmed. I don't know if anybody's nodding to any of this. Is there a yeses there or no? Okay.
Don't get time to read a book.
Yes, definitely.
Some people find it hard to read a book. It's just so because they're so stressed and wound up. Emotional responses. There's a pile of these. Probably anger is quite common. Anger is one of those ones which is what I call a activating movable emotion. It's a sort of a secondary emotion which keeps sadness away and keeps you going, but it can also cause problems in relationship. It's sort of better to be angry because anger gets you motivated to go than get sad and depressed. People also can feel numb. I not feel anything because numb is not anything, by the way. Numb is it's too much. So people that think feeling nothing, it's actually not nothing. It's I'm feeling too much, so I've just got to shut it all down. And some people's behaviors can change too. They can feel like they just can't do anything. They sit around and nothing gets done, and then they feel guilty about it. They have panic sometimes. I've got to go do something. Some people use alcohol as a way of coping, and some people just avoid it. I just don't want to know about it. I'm just going to avoid it. Okay, so why is it important to know this? Well, actually, I'm going to do a bit of a swap. We'll go to this one. Has anybody heard of the window of tolerance?
No.
No.
Okay, so your window, yeah. Okay, those that haven't, basically, it's a sort of bit of a pop culture psychology term these days. But what it means is if you're in your window of tolerance, you're able to think clearly, feel your emotions, and respond to events. Okay, and it's basically a function of adrenaline. So when your window's fine, your adrenaline's normal, you can think, you can clear, you can respond. When there's hyperarousal, too much adrenaline, too much going on, you actually go out your window and you become much more reactive, hypervigilant, your thinking can change and you can get really overwhelmed. When it actually becomes too much past that point, you actually drop down into what they call hypoarousal. And that's those people that just feel really dead, flat, and all they want to do is sleep. And you just can't think at all. So that's a window of tolerance. And that really affects your brain a lot. So if you've got any of the past, if we go back to any of these things, are these things or these things, you're probably getting out your window. And really what's happening to your brain is that if you can see the hand of the brain there, the one with the closed hand, there's like 3 parts of the brain. If you look at the, can you see when I move this? You guys see my cursor moving? Is that a yes or a no?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, okay. All right. So think of this as your brain stem, right? And it's your reptilian brain down here. Think of this as your limbic system, your emotional center, how you feel about yourself. How do you feel about why people love you, all those things like that. And then think of the top part of your fingers as your like wise brain intelligent self, okay? So when everything's going well and you're in your window, you can use all 3 parts of your brain. However, when you're out your window, what happens is your adrenaline pops right up, the blood to your frontal lobe gets off, and your lid flips, literally. And if you put yourself in an MRI machine, you wouldn't have any blood sitting up there in the frontal lobe. So you're only reacting from these 2 parts of your brain. So effectively, you're just using 2/3 of it. It's a good thing to know because it happens to lots of us. Okay, so how do we deal with that? And basically, one other point, if you're up there, you're not feeling safe. So part of this is about coping and reestablishing a sense of safety. And there's several ways you can do that. One is psychological preparedness. Other one is emotional regulation strategies. And there's physical strategies. Increase your resilience, which is possible because resilience can be increased. Increase your supports and self-care. And I'm just going to go a bit more into any of these. Okay, I'm just going to go stopping for a second just to ask for any questions. Any questions while I'm up this point? No questions? Okay, back to slide. Okay, thank you. All right, so psychological preparedness. Whoa. And that's something which has come from positive psychology. It's actually important in the warning part and the impact phases of the pandemic. And this sort of any trauma really. And considering you guys might be in sort of multiple trauma loops, depending on how everybody is in the family, it's a good one to know. One of the things is getting the realistic understanding of risk. So what's really going on, what is my risk really? And probably the best people to talk to about that is your GP and some of the Australian resources around that. Also, how you think you'll actually be able to cope. And can you manage the thoughts because people get many thoughts like, I can't cope, and feeling that you can manage those thoughts as well. And that's about also proactive planning and preparing and how you think you actually are socially connected to others. So they're all sort of fundamentals of the psychological preparedness. But there's things that stop you doing that. One of them is anxiety and getting worried and feeling helpless, because that can make you feel like you can't really do anything. And feeling like, this is so out of my control. It's like an act of God. I can't do anything about it. Some people also don't believe that if you prepare at all, it's going to help. How can you prepare for this, that feeling? Some people also think, well, it'll be fine anyway. They get that false sense of security that, they'll work out a vaccine in 2 weeks and everything will be good. Sort of like Trump does that. And some people think they underestimate their own risk, like, oh, it won't happen to me. I'm fit. My immunity is great. It won't happen to me. Everything will be all right. They're the things that sort of stop you from preparing. However, there is value in it, and that's actually been shown in research. And I had to use the toilet paper slide because I thought it was very apt for this talk. So one of the ways you do it is value and utilize how you've done it before in difficult situations. And you guys have been in difficult situations before. This wouldn't be the first one. And how did you cope? And really value those things you use to cope, because they're the things you can bring forward to cope here and now. And again, as I said, make sure your information you get is medically verified, not from, sort of like something like Women's Weekly, but something like from your GP. Make plans with your healthcare provider. Talk to the GP. Talk to the GP about it's good telehealth is in, so you don't have to go in as much. But how would we prepare for an emergency? What would we do? What is going to be set up for us on how we can do that? And who are the people I can contact with? And can I contact you in a certain situation? Or how do I get onto you as fast as possible? If anybody gets sick, advanced planning for that. Like, can you cordon off a part of the house? How would you serve the food? Who would be serving the food? Who would you bring in? How would you get food? All those sort of things. How would contact happen with other people? Who would care for who? All those sort of little things which maybe don't feel like much, but if you've got the plan there, it does take a level of stress out. And this is what I'm really talking about, because you cannot take away all the stress, but it's taking little chunks of stress out. So the overall big package of stress is not as big. Talking to the children as much in an open and honest way, as much as they can understand. There are a few books I saw on, I think your website, SWAN website, there was a book for kids around it. And I think of some of the resources I've given, there might be some books too. And connect to professionals as well, like outside professionals, not always medical, but sometimes counselling ones, or even support groups, and about how you go about getting support from those local services. The other thing to do is for emotional regulation is being mindful. And I know that's something everybody says, and people, when they visualize mindfulness, they visualize someone sitting there across lotus position, staring into space. That doesn't necessarily mean they're mindful, by the way. Mindfulness comes from the Buddhist practices, and a Buddhist can actually do something like live in a cave. I remember seeing a cave in Thailand where they said Buddhists hung out for about a week in this little cave. And the way they did that was when they're in the cave, they're just going second by second by second by second. So every moment they're just aware of the next second, or the second that is. And in a way, that means those how many seconds there are in a week just went, because they just went second by second by second. It basically focuses on the present experience without trying to change it. And the way it does that is it actually turns on this little spot in the brain called the insula, which is related to your body sensations, and another spot which is called the anterior cingulate cortex. And that's the region which allows you to switch attention to what's happening in the body and the environment in real time. So when you're mindful, you're staying in the real time. You're actually able to walk in the rain. So walking in the rain, what is that? Walking in the rain is feeling the coldness of the air, feeling the rain hitting parts of your skin, noticing what it feels like when it hits your skin, noticing the smells around which changes in the rain. Now you can walk in the rain with that experience, or you can walk in the rain with all the past experiences in your head playing out and all the problems, and end up just getting wet. And that's sort of what mindfulness is. It's about being in the moment. It doesn't mean you don't solve a problem. It just means sometimes you're not going to be able to solve the problem at that minute, and being able to stay present with what is really helpful. It's just another way of reducing stress. Does that make sense to people? Is that a yes? I'm hoping so. Okay, so there's some, any questions? No questions? Okay. All right, so just some mindfulness activities which people can try at home. One of the good ones is a grounding one, where you stand with your back against the wall and you actually feel the wall against your back fully. So you really notice the wall against your back. The other one is to move around the room mindfully. And when I'm saying that, it's like moving, noticing where your foot is touching the ground, where the heel touches, where the toe touches, what the ground feels like. If you do that with your bare foot, it's even more intense. You can do the bare feet on the floor too and engage the quads. So you just basically engage your muscles and really feel them. There's some very quick fixes to bring people out of just feeling overwhelmed too, and being more in the now. One is essential smelling oils. There's some really powerful ones, and I'm not talking about really smelling salts, but lavender, calming ones. Lavender citrus oils are very good because they're quite sharp and they're clean and they make people feel quite alert. And the sense of smell works on a different pathway to the pathway that makes you feel traumatized and overwhelmed. So it bypasses it, allows you to come now into the present. Heat packs are also very good, can be quite soothing. Mindful eating is something else which is useful to practice. And mindful eating just means again, really noticing yourself eating, picking up the spoon, noticing where you're holding the spoon, picking up, say, if we're eating breakfast, a cereal, watching the spoon come towards your lips, putting the cereal in your mouth, noticing where it touches the mouth, the different textures, the different tastes. And again, what we're doing is we're reducing sort of stress activation levels. A cold shower, if you can cope with that is it's mindful because it basically jolts your nervous system back to normal. If you're feeling so stressed and so overwhelmed and so like blank in the brain, getting into a cold shower can really reset your nervous system. It's actually a response that the nervous system does reset. And the important thing is I'm giving you some coping strategies, but you've got to work out which one works for you. And sometimes that just takes a bit of try and see. Not all of them are great for everybody. There's a whole pile of different breathing ones you can do too, which I'm talking about now. So some people like just noticing the breath, the in and out breath. Other people find that a little bit activating, just it's a bit overwhelming, too much. There's a really nice, what I call the wiggly breath one, where you breathe into your belly. And as you're breathing, I don't know if you can see me, you can pull your hand up and then you breathe out by wiggling your hand down. And it's quite a very soothing one you can do. There's a 3-phase breath, which is basically breathing in from the bottom and then letting it out from the middle to the top or the other way around, breathing to the top, middle, bottom. And that's what we call a contained breath. And that feels less sort of, containment's very good for people who are a bit traumatized because it makes them feel more secure. Another thing to do is draw your breath. And all you do is you get a pen and just follow your breath in and out. It usually looks like a sine curve, in and out, in and out, in and out. And if you do that for 5 minutes, you find that curve changes as well, and you end up just really enjoying the experience. And it's good to know which of these breathing exercises feel better because everybody likes different ones. Okay. So has anybody heard of Kirsten Neff, a self-compassion person? No? Self-compassion is a really important tool. It basically it protects you against your inner critic because half the time what makes life harder is how hard we are on ourselves. And people think, oh no, if we're not hard on ourselves, we won't get anything done. It actually doesn't work that way. You actually get more done and get more creative when you've got self-compassion. There's a lot of research on that too. So it has 3 components to it. One is self-kindness. So it's about being as kind to yourself as you are onto others. So rather than being harshly critical that you didn't make that appointment, you sort of try and be compassionate about why you didn't make the appointment. I always get people to look at, is that the whole picture? You're a terrible person because you didn't make the appointment. That's one picture. The whole picture might be, I've been overwhelmed. I've had to make 3 other appointments. I feel like I'm not getting enough support. I'm trying to manage everything. My brain is not being totally within the window. I am dropping the ball because I'm really tired and stressed. And I really wanted to make the appointment, but I just couldn't. It's a very different dialogue to you're stupid and horrible because you didn't make that appointment. And recognizing that you're just human. And other people make these mistakes as well. And again, it's a mindfulness component about just being aware about that inner critic that is going on, that's saying to you, I must, I should have, I would have, I could have, or I'm terrible. Gratitude is another thing that can be really helpful, and practicing it actually has been shown to really, again in research, to make people feel good. And it doesn't have to be gratitude for big things, by the way. It can be just gratitude for getting a nice warm cup of tea in the morning, or having a roof over your head, or having one day where nothing went bad. It makes you feel closer to people, especially if you tell them that you're grateful to them for anything they do. Like, thank you for making me the cup of tea. It was really nice. It made me feel good. It's sort of a win-win. You make them feel good. You make yourself feel good. You also, people with gratitude enjoy life more. There's that part, because it makes you feel better. You actually enjoy life more. And even in this space, in this pandemic, I'm sure there's things which haven't been as bad as you thought. They might have been good. And I was just wondering if anybody wanted to share that. So if I just go back to you guys, and just curious, does anybody want to share anything that sort of surprised you in this pandemic that felt all right? One thing? No? Okay, all right. I'll go back. Sorry?
One thing that's made me feel better is that my daughter's been well with her chest, because we've been isolated. So
there you go, the unexpected thing. Yeah. The unexpected thing from the okay, good, thank you.
So when we had her respiratory specialist checkup last week, it was the best her chest has ever been, and that was amazing.
Oh wow, that's really good news. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Anybody else have something unexpected? It doesn't have to be great and fantastic and wonderful. It can just be little.
I did. My son actually, I think, got more schoolwork done because he was one-on-one than he was in his classes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right. Thank you. See, it's these little things, and when you think about them, they do. What is it? Just thinking about that, how does it make you feel? Just that one little pocket of good thing. The person with the purple that just spoke. How does it make you feel just thinking about that little thing?
It was a bit of a relief, and then it makes the question of going back to school I'm less excited about going back to school because I don't know what's going to happen with the schoolwork now.
Okay, so that's where you sort of the part about it being relief is the good part, and then comes the next sort of future orientated issue. Okay, so staying with the part that's good is more helpful at the moment, just in terms of how you'd use it to help yourself. Like if you wrote a gratitude diary, that's what you could do. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, without the judgment attached to the next part, the future, which makes perfect sense what you're talking about, because, you know, part of the issue here is everything can be a problem at any stage. So that hypervigilance that happens. But how do you just bite-size it and take the best from the things you can at the moment in time? And that's not me trying to minimize all the other stuff. But how do you get something out of this that you can work with? Whoa, okay.
That's a good question. I love it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the next thing is also what we call radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is a funny term because it's the antithesis of what we want to do, really. But it is accepting what is here exactly as it is, with all its warts and all. And the reason it's useful, because what it does, it's only if you can't change it, right? If there's something you can't change right now, like if you're living in isolation, if you're put in isolation, you can't change being put in isolation. You can change how you experience isolation, but you can't change being put in isolation. So if you went throughout the whole isolation, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, or I don't want to be here, isolation will be suffering. Whereas if you go, yes, I'm in isolation, and I can't get out, but in isolation I can do this, this, and this, then there's a peace with it. So basically, all radical acceptance does, it takes away your suffering associated with the issue at hand. Doesn't mean you don't feel pain. And that's a hard thing to sort of split in a way. But pain is like a human experience. Pain of the loss and the grief and loss and sadness and the anxiety is all a human experience. But suffering is that extra level. And when you radically accept something you can't change, you take away the suffering. So it makes the harder thing easier. I hope that makes some sense. So firstly, you got to understand, are you resisting it really? Are you feeling bitter and resentful? Life shouldn't be this way. And sometimes it shouldn't, but it doesn't mean it isn't. And that's a hard bit. And being unhappy and frustrated with life all the time and thinking that if you just change one thing, that'd fix everything. And then trying to force other people to do separate things. That's sort of signs that you are resisting reality. And those things, how helpful are they? I mean, it's a question to ask yourself, is it helpful? It may feel helpful because it may feel like if I don't accept it, it's, it means I'm giving up. Sorry, if I accept it, I'm giving up. But it's not really that. It's more like it's causing you that sort of suffering. And then so it's second step is to like turn towards it. It's sort of like, doesn't mean you actually go all the way, just means like you look at the option, well, what happens if I do stop resisting reality? If I just say this is reality, if this is it, I'll feel it, and what can I do in this reality? It's sort of like making an internal commitment in a way to just stop fighting it and just be willing to accept. And if you can finally accept it in a non-judgmental way, which means I'm accepting it not because I'm weak, I'm just accepting because this is what it is, and feel all the emotions associated with it. Because often the lack of acceptance is also not wanting to feel everything because they're big feelings, and not looking for an out to try and escape that. The retrospectoscope is one of the biggest outs, by the way. People that use a lot of retrospectoscope, it's trying to find a way out of why they're there. You can get to radical acceptance. And Tyra Brach, who's a guru of radical acceptance, she calls that, if you really can do that, it's a moment of genuine freedom. So, I mean, very few people get all this way, but it's how do you reduce suffering? How do you be more mindful so you take away stress? And again, just little bits and pieces. Coming to resilience. So resilience is a funny term. It's sort of like, it's basically knowing that you can handle these challenges and difficulties. Doesn't mean you handle them like amazingly the whole time, but somehow you can handle it. You can get through. You can just manage to claw your way in there. And it can be, since some people are more resilient than others, probably means they're stressed. I think you're sort of wired to cope with a certain amount of stress. And then environment throws a pile of extra on you and you can just feel like, whoa. Some people might have more sturdier, or actually not sturdier, just less stress affected nervous systems, but everybody gets affected by stress. But you can increase resilience by having a positive view of yourself, just knowing what you've been able to do. And everybody here would have done something pretty amazing to get to here. Being able to make realistic plans and also follow them through, having that history. Even managing to go to the doctor and getting there. That's a realistic plan, and managing to follow it through. Getting that appointment that was really hard to get, but you managed to talk your way through it. Again, a realistic plan. Communicating your needs is really important. And having good problem-solving skills. And that's what I've generally found with people with who've got genetic conditions in their family. Their problem-solving skills are usually really, really good because they've had to be. They've had to learn how to sort out all these different things. They've learned how to be the conductor in the orchestra of all the the healthcare issues and be on top of everything. And it's important to also know that resilience is the norm. Most people are resilient, even those people that get PTSD, who only in a major disaster, only 15-20% of people will have PTSD. And most of those in the end will, probably only come down to about 10% if it doesn't get treated. The other thing about PTSD I wanted to bring up was the issue of PTSD in families with genetic conditions. I think it's very underreported and unacknowledged as well. There's so many different times where there's a possibility of having PTSD, like through the diagnosis, and people not recognizing that they've actually got it. They just keep living in this hypervigilant state. And some of the PTSD, when I work with people, it's sometimes working through those PTSD events to get rid of it. When I mean get rid of it, I mean put it as though it's a memory, not like when you go back to that memory, you feel like it's happening now. So if you've got any memories where you feel like if you go back to it, you get all the body sensations, you get the tight chest, you get the sort of trembling, you get dry mouth. If that's going on, you've got residual PTSD, and it's really worthwhile working with someone just to get rid of it. Because you can have the memory and feel sad, but you don't need to have all the other body sensations attached to it and not feel like it's happening now. Okay. So how do you, one of the things about how do you get more resilience? Well, basically it's resourcing yourself to remember your strengths. Really go through the time you had the last challenge, and I'm sure everybody here can think of those times. What did you learn about yourself? You're using a support group, you're a survivor, you're looking for help, you're able to reach out, you're able to get something, and have an image of that self. Sometimes have an image of that self and walk around with that self. It could be someone like, some people have used the Superwoman image and walked around like it. And how might you apply this strength now in that time, in this time? Some other quick and easy things is just look after yourself physically. Really eat healthy foods if you can, and have the occasional takeaway just relax in a way. Regular exercise is important. Walk, run, connecting to nature is really, really important. Nature has this amazing thing on our nervous system. Even sitting next to a tree and really connecting to it, sitting on the roots or put your back against the bark and looking up at the tree can be really healing. If you can, play some non-contact sports. They're allowed to be played now, such as tennis, golf, or even table tennis. There's some online yoga things you can do, and yoga is a really great thing to soothe the nervous system. There's a lot of research on that. Getting enough sleep and rest is important. Sleep particularly, because sleep helps our brains reorganize, and it really helps mental health. One of the worst things you can do to your mental health is have disrupted sleep. Having good sleep hygiene, which means regular sleeping times, the room's dark. It's also good if you have the bed made. Don't have to make it during the day, but just make it before you go to bed, because apparently a made bed is somehow easier to sleep in than an unmade bed. Don't use your communication devices in bed, and if you do, you put them on that sort of night light thing so you don't get triggered. Don't eat too late, because a full belly also makes it uncomfortable. I think 2 hours before bed is a good time. Overheating's an issue as well. Not so much in winter, probably more in summer, but some people put too many Doonas on. Use sleeping apps. The Calm app's quite good. Some people like to listen to a story or get the sort of guided meditation. The other thing is to listen to delta waves, because they're sort of sleep waves and they can allow your brain to relax. And if you're having too many nights without sleep, consider medication of sorts, because you can get out of a sleep cycle, and if you have too many nights without sleep, your brain will really change. It doesn't take much. So sometimes on a one-off occasion, medication can be all right if it's becoming a chronic problem. And the other thing is to take breaks during the day. Listen to your body and notice when you're feeling tired and allow yourself those breaks. If you can, have a bit of fun. Some people have some home dance parties. You can play board, jigsaw, puzzles, things like that. Virtual gaming. I found a fun way to escape was going off into a 3D virtual game world. I went to the moon, and I went to Africa, and I went down to the Great Barrier Reef in a 3D world. It was quite fun. It's definitely a way to sort of manage in self-isolation. Socially connect. We're actually social beings. Social connections are vital for us. It's sort of part of our DNA. If we don't have it, it's actually so damaging for our nervous systems, for our psyches, and it can be quite creative. Some people have Zoom dinner parties. They'll make a Zoom dinner together. They'll sit down and eat it. Some people will do the Google box on Zoom, where you all watch a movie and make comments around, what's going on. Joining a local community social thing is also good, or make your own. You could sort of, a lot of meetup groups now are online, so you can make your own meetup group. You guys have got this group, which you're doing something now, which is also good. And creating those social bubbles of those people that are also got the same ideas about self-isolating. And even though we're getting to that next step, because you guys have got probably a vulnerable population, you may not want to jump as fast as everybody else to the next step. So creating those social bubbles where you can get together with people that you feel reasonably safe about. It's really important to monitor your loneliness, because it's such a fundamental thing that if we can't share what's going on in our worlds with somebody, we get lonelier and lonelier. And people, that's why a lot of men die early when they live by themselves, because they don't share. Women communicate more and men don't. So I'm talking very stereotypical, so excuse any man that's around that isn't doing that. But if we don't share our inner worlds with somebody, we do feel lonely, even though we might be with them all the time. And so if you're feeling that, it's good to see if you can reach out to somebody. If that's difficult to do, sort of have a think about the one person that you could reach out to. Who would be the safest person? And who would be able to at least understand, or even if they don't give you help, they can give you listening support. And then have a think about what you want to say to them, and figure out a good time to be able to do that, and when to have it, so you've got this sort of safe space in a way. And if you don't find that's the right person, just keep on trying, or go and seek professional help with that too. It's another option. And in this sort of environment, in your environment in particular, it's really important that professional services on your side and have your back, that you have doctors that listen to you. And if you say, I'm worried about this, they take it seriously. And again, discuss the plan with your GP around the pandemic, and talk to them about what you're concerned about. So if you go to your next GP appointment, make a list of those things you're worried about and see if they can help brainstorm with some of the medical side of things. Any opportunities to get home visits, home deliveries, like chemists who deliver, times when you need to, go in for a particular appointment. If you go in like first cab off the rank or last, so you're not waiting around and, increased risks of exposure. Be creative with the NDIS. If there's things you need, and you can sort of say, well, okay, I need them for my child's condition. It may be that the child is old enough to have a desk. You need a desk. Use the desk as part of your sort of office works thing, or even a virtual reality. If that helps your child soothe itself, get one of those, a virtual reality machine. Be creative, because usually there's a bit of money in that bank with the NDIS, because they give it to lots to other resources as well. You can take sometimes from a pool that you're not using. People now are starting to get permission to use like my services from the NDIS for counselling. They've had to fight for it, and I've written letters to support it, but it's gone through. So if you're seeing a psychologist, you might be able to get that support through your NDIS, but you might have to fight for it. When you're making plans to see somebody, factor in all those things like transport. See if you can get permission to get transport paid for in this particular pandemic. and plan ahead as much as you can. And again, back to counselling services. So there's lots of different types of counselling services you can use. And I think there's a COVID, like Medicare gives you 10 appointments on COVID as well. So that's an extra 10 sessions on people that do bulk bill. Okay, self-care. It's hard to self-care in isolation. It's hard to self-care when you're a carer with kids. It's very hard to do. And sometimes self-care it's about creating more mini timeouts. Mini might be 10 minutes. It's not 10 hours, but it's 10 minutes. It's important. It's sort of like the concept of you need your oxygen mask on first on a plane before you put your kids on, because you need to make sure you can help your child. It's the same thing. It's protecting your own well-being. If you can, at times, there might be a lot of washing up to do, but if it's not bothering you too much, take that time out to just go either watch a movie, hear a podcast, in your own house if you get a bit of chance for peace and quiet. Get takeaway sometimes at night if you can afford it. Call friends and have a chat if you feel like you just need to pick me up. Give yourself a one-off gift of help, like go to, certain services which say have a cleaner, and have a cleaner come in once a month if you can afford it, just to help you out, or just even one-off sometimes, and ask for help for people. That's often a very hard thing for people to do, to ask for help, but it's a skill that needs to be learnt. Most people tend to say yes, and if they say no, don't give up, just keep on asking somebody else. All right, so kids. So in the pandemic, people have found that kids are often afraid that something's going to happen or someone will get ill, and they're worried about being separated. So it's about reassuring them about that. And sometimes they appear to be coping better than they actually are, because they're not actually saying anything. So you find out more from their behaviours than really what they're saying. But overall, kids are pretty resilient. It's something to remember as well. The way they show changes are things like restlessness, the way they draw things. They can have more aggressive drawings, or strange things come into their drawings. And the sort of time when they sort of ask questions, like just before they go to bed, might ask a strange question about, the virus or something like that. Sometimes they can go and feel like they're behaving as a younger person. They can have more nightmares as well and wake up and have trouble sleeping by themselves. Temper tantrums can increase. Their eating can get, they get a bit more fussier, and they're wanting to stay close to you, so more anxious in their attachment behaviours. So one of the most important things when you're helping kids is actually, firstly, make sure your nervous system is calm as it can be, because what's really important for kids is that nervous system to nervous system interaction. You have to act as though you're their frontal lobe, you're their sort of wise brain. And if you can do that, their nervous system will drop pretty fast as well. It's important to be honest, but not alarmist. It's more factual. And teach kids what they can do. You can say, well, washing your hands, cleaning your hands is a really good thing. That'll stop lots of things. And that'll allow them to feel a little bit more in control. And it's important to reassure them that you're on top of it. You're going to make sure they're going to be okay. And again, the same anxiety measures, sometimes just getting out, running around, reducing all that adrenaline build-up in their system is really good for them. This is another one, just a bit more about that. It's important to think also that in your family you might have kids which have the disability, and some kids and other children that are fine. And they'll react very differently to that, but there'll be a general feel around the house if tension is up as well. So it's important for all those members of the house to have that sort of acknowledgement to what the differences of what they're going to. Like an older child might feel much more anxious about a sibling with a disability, and just sort of reassuring that child that I'm on it, that's my job to do that. Avoid too much exposure with TV about COVID if you can. Maybe watch the news later on at night as opposed to when they're up. Sometimes that helps. And keep it to a sort of a minimum. One of the things that are probably most difficult to deal with are the meltdown things. And I just sort of thought I'd just talk about them just quickly, because They're one of the things that really sort of rattle our nervous systems. And the different types of meltdown. There's the temper one, which is basically, I'm feeling powerless, I don't like this, and that's no, right? And there's a sensory meltdown, which is when the brain is having difficulty processing sensory input, and it's a different sort of cry. It's sort of the cry where it's a real whining cry, and the feelings that the child's in pain, and they're covering their ears and their eyes, or they're sort of sensory recoiling from things, and they're not actually making much sense at all. Or the panic attack one, where they're actually scared, and their eyes get really big, and they're sort of they've got a fight, flight, or freeze reaction going on. It's good to know which type of meltdown you're actually dealing with, because there's different processes to managing each one. Overall, though, it's really important for each type of meltdown that you keep your nervous system really calm and talk in a calm voice, because, again, you need to be their frontal lobe. If it's a temper tantrum, the distractions are good. Stay close and stay calm, and just wait it out, really. Just be calm and wait it out. It will go. Your job is to just basically stay as calm as you can and try and distract them occasionally. When you see the quiet times happening in a temper tantrum, that's the time to try and distract. If you get the sensory meltdown going on, try and remove whatever's affecting them as fast as you can, if you know. Try and avoid it, but you can't always do that. Weighted blankets can be good sometimes, just to help regulate a child. A quiet space is good. And some people have sensory emergency kits, which are things a child really likes to deal with, to hold. Could be something a really, really soft doll or something really squishy. And just keep all the time talking in a really quiet voice and explaining what you're doing. With a panic attack, basically that person is really, really frightened and thinking their life's at risk, or their nervous system is anyway. So again, try and avoid triggers, but that's hard to do all the time. So it's important to make eye contact. Say, look at me, notice I'm okay, nothing's happening. Some people use touch, which can be a really nice soothing touch. Use a stroking touch, can be really helpful. And again, with distract, you can get them to do some clapping, rhythms, or tapping their shoulders in a rhythmic tapping, or just let's count to 10 slowly, 1, 2. They're the sort of things that can help with a panic attack and help get their frontal cortex back online. Okay, so couples. Okay, so the pandemic can be stressful because basically it magnifies how much we rely on our partners. And sometimes that can be a good thing, because we then realize how amazing it is to have them. And other times it just makes cracks bigger. So if there's been issues in the relationship, those issues can go both ways, really, but they can really open up to become big problems, or people can look at their other partner and go, wow, that person's amazing. I didn't realize they did all this thing. So it's important to try and understand what your partner's coping mechanisms are. And it's sometimes even good to just chat around it. How do you cope? What are you thinking about when something goes wrong? Are you thinking problem solving? What's important here? Is the emotions important? Getting a solution to a problem more important? It's important to communicate what you're needing, because often people use a sort of a passive aggressive approach, saying, oh, I really thought you'd have done this by now, instead of saying, I really needed you to do that. That would have been important to me. It's a very different approach. If you have a difficult conversation, it's good to start with a gratitude, because that softens someone's nervous system to start with, and they're more open to hearing it. So you may say, wow, it's amazing. Thanks so much. You've really been helpful taking the rubbish out. However, I was wondering, could you do that next time? When you do that next time, could you put a bag in there? Because sometimes it's just a bit easier for me to clean afterwards. And it's a totally different approach to just saying, you should have put a bag in there after you put the rubbish out. It's a very different approach. Finding time together, even if it's 5 minutes a day, to talk about your day, even if it's nothing much has happened. Like, what was it like today? Was it boring? Was it okay? Did you see a good movie? What did you think of the news? The thing about relationships in the pandemic and in isolation, people can become your whole world, and that's not healthy. sometimes. So it's really good to just create a bit of less pressure on the relationship by creating boundaries, where you might spend a certain amount of a day in different rooms if you can do that, or have different roles that are set up and different rituals of coming together at certain points in time, coming together for breakfast or coming together for afternoon tea or having a dinner together. And if things aren't going really, down the gurgler, you could also try therapy online, which helps. Now, this slide was just another slide for really when you're actually self-quarantining. I just put it in basically because sometimes you have to be totally by yourself. And it's, again, how you view it, thinking of it as perhaps not all bad, and it's something you didn't choose, but you just have to do it. It's that radical acceptance thing. Again, think of ways of connecting. Being generous to others in quarantine is also good, even if it's just being on the phone and helping others out. Have a daily routine in quarantine, which might feel like nothing, but you might get up, watch the news, have breakfast, maybe do a yoga thing online, write in a journal, things you can do to make your days go past. And again, limit exposure to media and bad news as well. Keep as many good news things in there. So I just put a couple of resources in there for you guys, how to get fast psychological support, some of the crisis lines, some good sources of information, and other resources just to for help and support, and some YouTube clips which might be interesting. And that's all. Thank you.